Daniel Carter noticed the bruise on his son's arm at breakfast, and the way 11-year-old Noah flinched when he reached for his fork. But what really made Daniel's blood run cold was how quickly Noah pulled down his sleeve and lied about bumping into a desk, because fathers know when their children are hiding something. And as Daniel drove away from the elite private school, where Noah was one of the few black students, he remembered his late wife's words. Always be the parent who shows up, especially when something feels wrong. So, when that email arrived inviting parents to lunch, Daniel turned his car around, never imagining that what he was about to witness would expose a conspiracy so cruel it would force an entire community to face the truth they've been ignoring for years. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The morning light filtered through the kitchen window as Daniel Carter stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with practiced ease. The sizzle of butter in the pan filled the comfortable silence of their home, a sound that usually brought warmth to these quiet mornings. He glanced over his shoulder at his son, Noah, who sat at the small breakfast table, fork in hand, eyes fixed on his plate. Something felt off. Daniel had learned to read his son's moods over the years, especially after losing his wife, Lena, 3 years ago. The two of them had become a team, learning to navigate grief together, finding their rhythm in a world that suddenly felt too big and too empty. But lately, that rhythm had been disrupted by something Daniel couldn't quite name. "Pancakes are almost ready, bud," Daniel said, trying to sound casual as he slid 2 golden pancakes onto a plate. He turned and walked to the table, setting the plate down in front of Noah with a gentle smile. Noah murmured a quiet thank you and reached for the syrup bottle. That's when Daniel saw it. As Noah extended his right arm, he winced, his face tightening with pain for just a fraction of a second before he caught himself and forced his expression back to neutral. Daniel's eyes narrowed. He sat down across from his son, watching carefully as Noah poured syrup with deliberate slowness, favoring his left hand more than usual. "You okay?" Daniel asked, keeping his tone light. "Yeah, I'm fine," Noah replied quickly, too quickly, his voice carrying that rehearsed quality that every parent learns to recognize as a lie. Daniel leaned forward slightly, tilting his head to get a better look at Noah's right arm. There, just barely visible beneath the sleeve of his school uniform shirt, was a dark purple bruise creeping toward his wrist. "Noah," Daniel said gently, "what happened to your arm?" Noah's hand shot down, tugging the sleeve firmly over the bruise. His eyes darted up to meet his father's for just a moment before dropping back to his plate. "It's nothing, Dad. I bumped into a desk yesterday during our class. You know how clumsy I can be." The explanation came too smoothly, as if Noah had been practicing it in his mind, preparing for this exact moment. Daniel wanted to press further, to demand the truth, but he also knew his son. Noah had always been the type to internalize things, to carry burdens silently rather than worry the people he loved. It was a trait he'd inherited from his mother, that quiet strength that sometimes looked like stubbornness. Daniel took a slow breath, deciding not to push. "Not yet." "All right," he said softly. "But if something's going on, you know you can tell me, right?" Noah nodded, shoving a piece of pancake into his mouth to avoid having to say anything more. They finished breakfast in near silence, the only sounds being the scrape of forks against plates and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Daniel cleaned up while Noah gathered his backpack, and soon they were heading out to the car for the morning drive to school. The drive to Crestwood Academy was usually one of Daniel's favorite parts of the day. It gave him 20 uninterrupted minutes with his son, a chance to talk about anything and everything. But this morning, Noah sat stiffly in the passenger seat, his backpack clutched on his lap like a shield, staring out the window as the familiar streets rolled by. Daniel tried to start a conversation. "So, what's on the agenda today? Any big tests coming up?" "Just the usual stuff," Noah replied, his voice flat. "How's our project going? The one with the watercolors?" "It's fine." Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Every question met with a wall. He glanced over at his son, taking in the tension in Noah's shoulders, the way his jaw was clenched tight. This wasn't just a bad morning. This was something deeper. They turned onto Oakmont Drive, and the imposing iron gates of Crestwood Academy came into view. The school sat on a sprawling campus with manicured lawns, old brick buildings covered in ivy, and a fountain at the center of the circular driveway that seemed to announce wealth and prestige to anyone who entered. Daniel had worked hard to afford this place, believing it would give Noah opportunities, connections, a future brighter than anything he'd had growing up. But as they passed through those gates, Daniel noticed something he'd missed before. Noah's entire body changed. His shoulders hunched forward, his breathing became shallow, and his eyes took on a look that Daniel could only describe as resignation mixed with fear. "Noah," Daniel started, but his son was already unbuckling his seatbelt as they pulled into the drop-off lane. Daniel parked and watched as students milled about, their expensive backpacks slung over their shoulders, talking and laughing in clusters. As Noah stepped out of the car, several kids glanced in his direction. Some smirked, others exchanged knowing looks, and a few offered expressions that looked almost like pity. Daniel's chest tightened. He got out of the car, wanted to walk Noah to the entrance like he used to when Noah was younger, but his son was already moving away, head down, trying to blend into the crowd. Then something happened that made Daniel's protective instincts flare. A girl with curly brown hair came rushing toward Noah, her face flushed and her eyes wide with urgency. Daniel recognized her vaguely from school events. Olivia, he thought her name was. She reached Noah just as he was about to head toward the main building. "Noah," she whispered breathlessly, grabbing his sleeve. "Don't go to lunch today. Please." Noah turned to her, confusion and alarm crossing his face. "What? Why?" But before Olivia could answer, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Miss Brooks, what are you doing? Get to class immediately." A tall woman in a navy blazer strode toward them, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. Daniel recognized her instantly. Ms. Elaine Whitford, the vice principal. He'd met her once during orientation, and even then, something about her had felt cold, too rigid, too quick to judge. Olivia's eyes went wide with fear. She released Noah's sleeve and hurried away without another word, throwing one last worried glance over her shoulder. Ms. Whitford reached Noah, looking down at him with an expression that made Daniel's blood run cold. There was no warmth there, no concern for a child under her care. Just irritation and something else, something harder to define. "You better behave today, Noah," she said, her voice clipped and severe. "I won't tolerate any more disruptions from you." Daniel stepped forward, ready to intervene, but Ms. Whitford had already turned on her heel and walked away without so much as acknowledging his presence. It was as if he didn't exist, as if the parent of one of her students wasn't worth even a polite greeting. Noah stood frozen, his face pale. Daniel walked up beside him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You okay, son?" Noah nodded quickly, but his eyes told a different story. "I'm fine, Dad. I gotta go. I'll see you after school." Before Daniel could say anything more, Noah slipped away, disappearing into the crowd of students heading inside. Daniel stood there for a long moment, watching the spot where his son had vanished. Everything about this morning felt wrong. The bruise, the fear in Noah's eyes, Olivia's desperate warning, Ms. Whitford's coldness. He walked slowly back to his car, his mind racing. As he slid into the driver's seat, he didn't start the engine right away. Instead, he sat there, replaying everything in his head. The way Whitford spoke to Noah, the tone, the lack of respect, the warning. Something wasn't right. Daniel finally started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, but he couldn't shake the feeling gnawing at his gut. He drove down the street, intending to head to work, but his mind kept circling back to Noah, to the fear, to the bruise, to the practiced lies. At a red light, his phone buzzed. He glanced down at the screen. An email notification from Crestwood Academy. He opened it, scanning the message quickly. "Dear Crestwood families, we would like to remind you that parents are always welcome to visit our campus during lunchtime. We believe in maintaining an open and transparent environment where families feel connected to their children's daily experiences." Daniel stared at the email, frowning. He'd received these kinds of messages before, standard reminders that felt more like public relations than genuine invitations. But the timing of this one felt strange, almost too convenient. He set his phone down and pulled into a nearby parking lot, cutting the engine. For a moment, He just sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. Then, as if summoned by the weight of the moment, a memory surfaced. Lena, sitting beside him on their back porch one evening, Noah playing in the yard. She'd turned to him, her eyes serious, and said something he'd never forgotten. "Daniel, promise me something. If Noah ever needs you, if something ever feels wrong, don't wait. Don't second-guess yourself. Always be the parent who shows up, especially when something feels wrong." He'd promised her then, holding her hand as the sun set. And he'd kept that promise through every fever, every scraped knee, every school event. But this was different. This wasn't about showing up for a soccer game or a parent-teacher conference. This was about instinct, about the quiet alarm bells ringing in his mind, telling him that his son was suffering in a way he couldn't see, in a place where he was supposed to be safe. Daniel sat up straighter, his jaw setting with determination. He checked the time. Lunch was in 2 hours. He had work he was supposed to be doing, meetings he was supposed to attend. But none of that mattered. He pulled out his phone and texted his assistant, letting her know he'd be unavailable for the morning. Then he turned the car around and headed back toward the school. He didn't have a plan. He didn't know what he was going to find. But he knew, with absolute certainty, that today was not a day to stay away. Daniel arrived back at Crestwood Academy just before noon. The parking lot was busier now, with a few other parents' cars scattered near the visitor spaces. He parked toward the back, away from the main flow of traffic, and sat for a moment, gathering himself. His phone buzzed with work emails, notifications about projects and deadlines, but he ignored them all. Right now, nothing else mattered except making sure Noah was okay. He stepped out of the car, straightening his jacket, and walked toward the main entrance. The building looked different in the midday light, less imposing but somehow more isolating. He could hear the faint sounds of children's voices echoing from somewhere inside. The front office was quiet. A receptionist glanced up as he entered, offering a polite smile. "Can I help you?" "I'm here for lunch visitation," Daniel said calmly. "Daniel Carter. My son is Noah Carter, 6th grade." She nodded, barely looking up from her computer. "Sign in here, please. The cafeteria is down the main hall. Take a left at the trophy case." Daniel signed his name on the clipboard, clipped a visitor badge to his shirt, and headed down the hallway. His footsteps echoed on the polished floors, mixing with the distant sounds of laughter and clattering trays. As he approached the cafeteria, the noise grew louder, a chaotic blend of conversations, chair legs scraping, and the occasional shout from an overly excited student. He paused at the entrance, taking in the scene. The cafeteria was large, with long tables arranged in neat rows. Students clustered together in groups, some laughing over their lunches, others trading snacks, or scrolling on phones they weren't supposed to have. Teachers and staff stood along the perimeter, supervising with varying degrees of attention. And there, near the far corner, sitting alone at a table meant for 8, was Noah. Daniel's heart clenched. His son sat hunched over his tray, picking at his food without really eating, his eyes focused on the table as if willing himself to disappear. No one sat near him. No one even looked his way. It was as if an invisible barrier had been drawn around him, marking him as separate, as other. Daniel started to move toward him, but then he noticed something that made him pause. Ms. Whitford stood near the center of the room, her arms crossed, engaged in what looked like an intense conversation with a man Daniel didn't immediately recognize. The man was tall, well-dressed in an expensive suit, his posture radiating confidence and entitlement. They were both looking in Noah's direction, their expressions a mixture of irritation and expectation, as if they were waiting for something to happen. Daniel hung back, positioning himself behind a cluster of parents who were chatting near the entrance, keeping his eyes locked on his son. Then it happened. A boy with blonde hair and a smug expression, someone Daniel vaguely recognized from school photos, walked past Noah's table carrying his lunch tray. As he passed, he deliberately bumped Noah's tray with his elbow, sending it skidding across the table. Milk spilled, a sandwich tumbled onto the floor, and the noise drew the attention of half the cafeteria. Noah looked up, startled, his face flushing with embarrassment. But before he could say anything, before he could even process what had happened, The blond boy spun around and shouted at the top of his lungs. "Ms. Whitford!" He threw food. Noah just threw his food at me. The cafeteria fell silent. Every head turned. Every eye focused on Noah, who sat frozen, his mouth open in shock, his hands still on the table nowhere near the tray. Ms. Whitford's face transformed. Her irritation shifted into something darker, something Daniel recognized immediately as barely restrained rage. She stormed across the cafeteria, her heels hammering against the tile floor, her eyes locked on Noah with a fury that made Daniel's protective instincts roar to life. "Noah Carter!" she bellowed, her voice echoing through the now silent room. "How dare you? I warned you this morning. I told you to behave." Noah shrank back in his seat, his voice small and trembling. I didn't do anything, Don't you lie to me." Whitford snapped, closing the distance between them with terrifying speed. Daniel started moving, his body reacting before his mind could catch up, but he was too far away, too many tables between them. Whitford reached Noah's table. She leaned over him, her face red with anger, her finger jabbing toward him accusingly. "You are a constant disruption, a problem that refuses to be solved." And then, in a moment that seemed to happen in slow motion, Ms. Whitford raised her hand. Not to gesture, not to point, to strike. Her hand pulled back, her palm open, aimed directly at Noah's face. Noah flinched, his arms coming up instinctively to protect himself, his eyes squeezed shut, bracing for the impact. But the blow never landed. "Don't you dare touch my son." The words cut through the cafeteria like a blade, sharp and absolute. Every head whipped around. Ms. Whitford froze, her hands still raised, her eyes going wide. Daniel Carter was striding across the cafeteria, his eyes locked on Whitford with an intensity that made even the adults in the room take a step back. His voice was calm, controlled, but underneath it was a current of barely contained fury that made it clear he would tolerate nothing less than her immediate compliance. The room held its breath. Students gasped, some covering their mouths. Teachers stopped mid-step, unsure of what to do. The well-dressed man Daniel had seen earlier, Christopher Hale, stiffened, his face tightening with alarm. Ms. Whitford slowly lowered her hand, her face shifting from rage to shock to something that looked almost like fear. "Mr. Carter, this is a school matter. This is assault," Daniel said, his voice steady as steel as he reached Noah's side. "And you will step away from my son. Now." Whitford took a step back, but her pride wouldn't let her retreat entirely. She straightened, smoothing her blazer as if trying to regain her composure. "Your son has been a repeated problem in this school, Mr. Carter. I am responsible for maintaining order, and he forced my hand with his behavior." Daniel didn't respond to her immediately. Instead, he knelt down beside Noah, who was trembling, tears streaming down his face, his small body shaking with suppressed sobs. "Dad, I'm sorry," Noah whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." Daniel placed both hands gently on Noah's shoulders, looking him directly in the eyes. "Noah, listen to me. You have nothing to be sorry for. Do you understand me?" "Nothing." Noah's lip trembled, but he nodded, clinging to his father's words like a lifeline. Daniel stood, turning back to Ms. Whitford, his protective instincts fully engaged. "My son did nothing wrong, and you know it." Whitford opened her mouth to argue, but before she could speak, a small voice broke the tension. Noah didn't do anything. Everyone turned. Olivia Brooks stood up from her table, her face pale, but her voice surprisingly steady despite the fear in her eyes. Her hands were clenched at her sides, and she looked terrified, but she held her ground. "They've been picking on him all week," Olivia continued, her voice growing stronger. "I saw it. Everyone saw it. And she knew." She pointed at Ms. Whitford. "She knew, and she didn't stop it." A wave of murmurs rippled through the cafeteria. Students exchanged glances, some looking guilty, others relieved that someone had finally spoken up. The adults in the room shifted uncomfortably, the truth settling over them like a heavy blanket. Ms. Whitford's face drained of color. That is absolutely. "It's true," another voice said. Then another, and another. Students began speaking up, some standing, others staying seated, but nodding in agreement. The dam had broken. The truth was spilling out, and there was no stopping it now. Christopher Hale stepped forward, his voice sharp. "Now wait just a minute. My son would never." "Your son is a bully," Daniel said, cutting him off with a look that silenced the man instantly. "And you're enabling it." The cafeteria doors burst open. Principal Harrison Reed rushed in, his face flushed and panicked, clearly having been summoned by someone on staff. He took in the scene, the standing students, the tearful Noah, Daniel's protective stance, and Ms. Whitford's guilty expression. "What is going on here?" Reed demanded, though his voice lacked authority. He looked overwhelmed, like a man who just walked into a disaster already in progress. "Your vice principal just attempted to assault my son in front of everyone here," Daniel said, his voice clear and unwavering. "And from what I'm hearing, this isn't an isolated incident. This is a pattern." Reed's eyes darted between Daniel, Whitford, and the watching students. We should discuss this in my office, Mr. Carter." "There's no need to. The humiliation happened publicly," Daniel interrupted, his voice firm. "The truth will too." Reed swallowed hard, looking utterly lost. He turned to Ms. Whitford, silently pleading for an explanation that would make this all go away, but she had none to give. Christopher Hale tried again, stepping forward with an arrogant tilt to his chin. "Principal Reed, I think you'll find that this is all a misunderstanding. My son was simply defending himself from Noah's disruptive behavior." Daniel didn't even acknowledge him. He kept his focus on Reed, on the principal who was supposed to protect children like Noah, but had clearly failed to do so. Then, a young teacher, someone Daniel had seen at school events but never spoken to, approached hesitantly. She looked nervous, glancing around as if afraid of being overheard. She leaned in close to Daniel and whispered, her voice barely audible. "Check the disciplinary files." Some of the dates were changed. Daniel's eyes sharpened. He looked at the teacher, who gave him a barely perceptible nod before stepping back into the crowd, trying to disappear. Reed was fumbling for words, trying to regain control. "Mr. Carter, I assure you, we take all allegations seriously. If you could just—" "I want to see the cafeteria camera footage," Daniel said, his voice cutting through Reed's stammering. "Right now." Reed's face went pale. He hesitated, glancing at Ms. Whitford, whose expression had gone rigid. I'm not sure we can access that immediately. There are protocols." "Then follow them," Daniel said. "But I'm not leaving until I see that footage." Ms. Whitford stepped forward, her voice defensive. "There's no need for that, Principal Reed. I already documented the incident in my report. Everything is accounted for." Daniel turned to her slowly, his gaze steady. "Then you should have no problem with us verifying your account." The standoff hung in the air, tension crackling between them. Students watched with wide eyes. Teachers whispered to one another. Parents who had come for lunch stood frozen, uncertain of what they had just witnessed. And then, breaking the silence, 3 students approached. They looked at each other nervously, then at Noah, then at Daniel. One of them, a girl with glasses and a determined expression, spoke up. "We have videos," she said quietly, "from multiple days. On our phones." The room seemed to tilt. Principal Reed's face went ashen. Ms. Whitford took an involuntary step backward. Christopher Hale's confident smirk vanished. Daniel looked at the students, then at his son, who was staring at them with a mixture of disbelief and hope. Everything was about to explode, and Daniel was ready for it. The cafeteria had transformed from a place of routine lunch chatter into something resembling a courtroom. Students stood frozen, parents whispered urgently to one another, and staff members exchanged worried glances. The revelation that students had video evidence hung in the air like a thundercloud ready to burst. Principal Reed looked like a man watching his career crumble in real time. His face had gone from flushed to pale in a matter of seconds, and his hands trembled slightly as he raised them in what he probably hoped was a calming gesture. "Everyone, please," Reed said, his voice cracking slightly. "Let's all take a breath and move this discussion to my office, where we can address these concerns in a more appropriate setting." Daniel shook his head firmly, his arms still protectively around Noah's shoulders. No, whatever needs to be said can be said right here. My son was humiliated in front of all these people. If there's truth to be told, it gets told the same way. Ms. Whitford's composure was fracturing. She stepped forward, trying to reclaim some authority. Mr. Carter, you're being unreasonable. These children are confused about what they saw. I was merely attempting to discipline a student who has been consistently disruptive, and she's lying. Olivia's voice rang out again, stronger this time. She stood straighter now, emboldened by the other students who'd spoken up. Her mother, a woman with kind eyes and a worried expression, had pushed through the crowd and now stood beside her daughter, hand on her shoulder. Olivia, honey, what's going on? Her mother asked gently. Olivia looked up at her mother, then back at the crowd. Mom, Noah didn't do anything. He never does anything. But they blame him anyway. Every single day. Another student, a boy with dark hair and a nervous energy, spoke up from across the room. It's true, Mrs. Brooks. I've seen it too. They pick on him, and when he tries to defend himself or just ignore it, Ms. Whitford shows up and acts like he's the problem. Ms. Whitford's face reddened. That is absolutely ridiculous. I treat every student fairly and equally. If Noah has faced disciplinary action, it's because his behavior warranted it, not because of some imagined bias. Then explain the videos, Daniel said quietly, turning to the 3 students who'd first mentioned having evidence. Please, show us what you have. The girl with glasses stepped forward, pulling out her phone with shaking hands. Her 2 friends flanked her, offering silent support. Principal Reed moved to intercede, but several parents had now formed a loose circle around the students, their expressions making it clear they wanted to see what was on those phones. This is from last Tuesday, the girl said, her voice wavering but determined. She held up her phone, and those closest leaned in to watch. The video was shaky, clearly filmed discreetly during lunch. It showed Noah sitting alone, eating quietly, when Christopher Hale's son approached with 2 other boys. They stood around Noah's table, talking loudly enough that the phone's microphone caught fragments. Nobody wants you here, charity case. Why don't you go back to wherever you came from? This school's for people who actually belong. Noah kept his head down, not responding, clearly trying to ignore them. Then one of the boys deliberately knocked Noah's water bottle off the table. It clattered to the floor, water spilling everywhere. Noah stood up to retrieve it, and that's when Ms. Whitford appeared in the frame, striding over with her characteristic sharp steps. But she didn't address the boys surrounding Noah. Instead, she pointed directly at Noah. What is going on here? Are you causing trouble again? The video captured Noah's confused expression as he tried to explain. They knocked over my... I don't want to hear excuses. Clean this up immediately and stop disrupting other students' lunch. The boys around him smirked and walked away. Ms. Whitford followed them with her eyes, said nothing to them, then turned and left Noah standing there alone with the mess. The video ended. The silence in the cafeteria was deafening. Principal Reed's face had gone completely white. Several parents were shaking their heads in disbelief. Ms. Whitford opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again, struggling to find words. That video doesn't show the full context, she stammered. There were prior incidents that day. Noah had already. We have more, another student said, stepping forward with their phone. From Thursday, and Monday, and last week. One by one, students began coming forward, each holding up their phones like pieces of evidence in a trial. Daniel watched as the videos played, each one more damning than the last. Noah being tripped in the hallway, while a teacher watched and did nothing. Noah being mocked during group work while Ms. Whitford stood nearby, clearly within earshot, and simply walked away. Noah's artwork being deliberately destroyed by Hale's son, with Noah being blamed for starting a fight when he tried to protest. And in every single video, Ms. Whitford appeared, not to help Noah, but to blame him, to reprimand him, to make him the problem. Daniel felt his chest tighten with each video. His son had been suffering like this for weeks, maybe months, and he'd had no idea. Noah had been protecting him, trying to handle it alone, not wanting his father to worry. The guilt hit Daniel like a physical blow. Christopher Hale pushed forward, his face red with indignation. This is absurd. These videos are taken out of context. Boys will have disagreements. That's just part of growing up. My son is not a bully, and I resent the implication. Your son called my son a charity case, Daniel said, his voice dangerously quiet. He told him to go back to wherever he came from. That's not a disagreement. That's racism. That's harassment. Hale's face went purple. How dare you? My family has donated thousands to this school. We have every right to. You have the right to teach your child how to be a decent human being, Daniel interrupted. Money doesn't buy you the right to torment other children. The crowd of parents was growing restless. Several had pulled out their own phones, recording the confrontation. Daniel could see the calculation in Principal Reed's eyes as he realized how quickly this could spiral into a public relations nightmare. Please, everyone, Reed said desperately. Let's all calm down. Mr. Carter, Ms. Whitford, Mr. Hale, if we could just step into my office. No, came a chorus of voices. Parents, students, even a few teachers. One mother stepped forward, her expression fierce. My daughter told me there were problems with how certain students were being treated. I didn't believe her. I thought she was exaggerating. But now I'm seeing that she was telling the truth, and you all knew about it. Another parent chimed in. How long has this been going on? How many other kids have been treated like this? Principal Reed raised his hands helplessly. I assure you, the school takes all allegations of bullying very seriously. We have protocols in place. Then why weren't they followed? Daniel asked, his voice cutting through the chaos. Why did every report apparently result in my son being blamed? Why were these videos necessary for anyone to believe what was happening? Reed had no answer. He looked at Ms. Whitford, who stood rigid, her earlier confidence completely shattered. Her hands were clenched at her sides, and her face had taken on a grayish pallor. A young teacher, the same one who'd whispered to Daniel earlier about the altered files, spoke up hesitantly. Principal Reed, I think you should know that several of us have tried to report concerns about inconsistencies in disciplinary records. We were told not to worry about it. Reed's head snapped toward her. That's not, I never said. You told me that Ms. Whitford had everything under control. The teacher pressed, finding courage in the moment. You said to trust her judgment and not question her methods. The walls were closing in. Daniel could see it happening in real time. Reed was realizing that his negligence, his willingness to look the other way, his desire to keep wealthy donors happy, had created a system where a child could be systematically tormented while the adults charged with protecting him did nothing. Olivia's mother spoke up, her arm tight around her daughter. Olivia told me this morning that she was scared to sit with Noah at lunch. She said a teacher told her and other students that Noah was better left alone. What kind of school tells children to ostracize another child? More murmurs rippled through the crowd. Students were nodding, some tearfully. Parents looked horrified. Ms. Whitford finally snapped. This is ridiculous. I have worked at this school for over 20 years. My record is impeccable. I will not stand here and be accused of misconduct by a group of children who don't understand the complexities of maintaining order in a school environment. Then let's look at the official footage, Daniel said calmly. The cafeteria has security cameras. Let's watch what happened today. Right now. Reed's face went even paler. I don't think we can access that without proper authorization from. I'm authorizing it, said a voice from the crowd. Everyone turned. A woman in a business suit stood near the entrance. Daniel didn't recognize her, but Principal Reed clearly did. His face went from pale to ashen. Board member Patricia Langston, the woman said, stepping forward. I was here for a routine facilities inspection when I heard the commotion. Principal Reed, I'm ordering you to access that footage immediately. The board will want to review this situation thoroughly. Reed looked like he might be sick. He nodded weakly and pulled out his phone, making a call to the security office. While they waited, the cafeteria remained tense, everyone acutely aware that they were witnessing something significant, something that would change the school. Daniel knelt down beside Noah again. His son had been silent through most of this, overwhelmed by the attention and the revelations. Hey, buddy, You okay? Noah's eyes were red from crying, but he nodded. Dad, I didn't want you to know. I thought I could handle it. I thought if I just kept my head down and didn't cause trouble, it would stop. Daniel's heart broke. He pulled Noah into a tight hug. You did nothing wrong. Nothing. Do you hear me? This is not your fault. This is on them, not you. I just wanted to fit in, Noah whispered against his father's shoulder. I just wanted friends. You deserve friends. You deserve respect. You deserve to feel safe at school. Daniel pulled back, looking his son in the eyes. And I'm going to make sure that happens. A security staff member arrived with a laptop, setting it up on one of the cafeteria tables. Principal Reed, board member Langston, Daniel, Ms. Whitford, and several parents gathered around. The timestamp showed today's date, starting about 10 minutes before Daniel had arrived. The footage played in silence. Everyone watched as Christopher Hale's son deliberately collided with Noah's tray. They watched him spin around and loudly accuse Noah of throwing food. They watched Ms. Whitford storm across the cafeteria with rage on her face. They watched her raise her hand to strike Noah. And they watched Daniel arrive just in time to stop it. The video didn't lie. It couldn't be explained away or recontextualized. It was exactly what it appeared to be. An adult in a position of authority attempting to physically assault a child who had done nothing wrong. Board member Langston's expression was stone. She turned to Ms. Whitford. Do you have anything to say? Ms. Whitford's mouth opened and closed. No words came out. For the first time, she had no justification, no excuse, no way to spin the narrative in her favor. Principal Reed slumped into a chair, his head in his hands. I didn't know, he mumbled. I didn't know it was this bad. You didn't want to know, Daniel said quietly. There's a difference. Patricia Langston straightened, her professional demeanor firmly in place. This meeting is over. Principal Reed, Ms. Whitford, my office. Now, the rest of you, please clear the cafeteria. Classes are suspended for the remainder of the day. Parents, you may collect your children. As people began to disperse, still murmuring and shaking their heads, Daniel gathered Noah's belongings. Christopher Hale tried to approach, perhaps to offer some kind of explanation or apology, but Daniel held up a hand. Stay away from my son, he said simply. And keep your son away from him too. Hale opened his mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. He turned and left, his earlier arrogance completely deflated. As Daniel and Noah walked toward the exit, students approached Noah one by one. Some apologized. Some just offered silent nods of support. Olivia hugged him briefly, whispering something Daniel couldn't hear, but that made Noah's eyes well up again. They were almost at the door when one of the students who'd shown videos ran up, breathless. Mr. Carter, wait. There's something else you should know. Daniel turned. What is it? The student glanced around nervously. The disciplinary files. The ones that teacher mentioned. I heard Ms. Whitford talking to someone in the office last week. She said something about backdating incidents to create a pattern. I didn't understand what she meant at the time, but now. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Who was she talking to? I don't know. Someone on the phone. But she sounded worried, like she was trying to cover something up before anyone noticed. Daniel filed that information away. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Daniel and Noah sat in the car, neither quite ready to drive away yet. Inside the school building, chaos continued to unfold. Through the windows, Daniel could see more parents arriving, summoned by urgent phone calls and text messages. The news was spreading fast. Noah sat quietly, exhausted from the emotional toll of the day. Daniel reached over and squeezed his shoulder gently. We don't have to stay. We can go home. Before Noah could respond, someone tapped on Daniel's window. He looked up to see Olivia's mother, her expression determined. Daniel rolled down the window. Mrs. Brooks. Call me Angela, she said. Mr. Carter, I just want you to know that Olivia and I are staying. Other parents are too. We're demanding answers, and we want you there when we get them. Daniel hesitated, glancing at Noah. I don't know if. Dad, Noah said quietly. I want to stay. I want to see this through. Daniel studied his son's face. There was fear there, yes, but also something else. Determination. Courage. Noah was tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of being treated like he didn't matter. Okay, Daniel said, turning back to Angela. "We'll stay." By the time they returned to the building, the cafeteria had been transformed into an impromptu assembly space. Dozens of parents had gathered, along with students, teachers, and staff. Principal Reed stood near the front, looking haggard, while board member Langston spoke quietly with other board members who'd been called in for the emergency. Daniel and Noah found seats toward the middle of the room. Olivia and her mother sat down beside them. Other families Daniel vaguely recognized from school events filled in around them, creating a sense of solidarity that felt both comforting and necessary. Patricia Langston called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for your patience during this difficult situation. I want to assure every parent here that the school board takes these allegations with the utmost seriousness. We have begun a comprehensive review of today's events and will be conducting a full investigation into the matters that have been brought to light." "What about the videos?" someone shouted from the back. "What about the proof we've all seen?" Langston nodded. "The videos provided by students are being reviewed as we speak. They will form part of our investigation." Angela stood up. "With all due respect, Board Member Langston, we don't need an investigation to see what happened. We have video evidence. We have eyewitness testimony. We have a vice principal who attempted to strike a child in front of dozens of witnesses. What more do you need?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Before Langston could respond, one of the students from earlier approached the front, holding their phone. "Can I show everyone something? Please." Langston hesitated, then nodded. The student connected their phone to the projector system that was typically used for presentations. The room's lights dimmed slightly as the video began to play on the large screen at the front of the cafeteria. This video was from several days ago. It showed Noah walking down a hallway between classes when Christopher Hale's son and two friends surrounded him, shoving him against the lockers. Noah tried to walk away, but they blocked his path, laughing and taunting him. The audio was clear enough to hear some of what they said. "What's wrong? Can't afford real clothes? Bet your dad can barely pay tuition here. You don't belong at Crestwood." Noah kept his head down, trying to leave, but they kept pushing him back. Then Ms. Whitford appeared in the frame, walking down the hallway. The students immediately dispersed, acting innocent. Whitford looked at Noah, who was clearly shaken, his books scattered on the floor. "Pick those up and get a class," she said curtly, not asking what had happened, not checking if he was okay. She simply walked past him, as if he were an inconvenience. The video ended. Parents were visibly angry now, some standing, others shaking their heads in disgust. Another student approached. "I have one too. From last week." Then another. "From 2 weeks ago." A fourth. "From a month ago." One by one, students projected their videos. Each one showed a pattern that was impossible to deny. Noah being harassed, isolated, blamed, and ignored. Ms. Whitford consistently appearing in these videos, never helping, often making things worse by punishing Noah instead of his tormentors. But perhaps the most damning video came from a student Daniel didn't recognize, a quiet girl who nervously approached the projector. "This one is from the office," she said softly. "I was waiting outside Principal Reed's office for a meeting about my college recommendations. The door was open a little, and I heard voices. I started recording because it sounded wrong. The video was mostly audio, the visual showing just a sliver of the office through the cracked door. But the voices were clear. Ms. Whitford's voice. The Carter boy is becoming a problem. Parents are starting to ask questions. An unfamiliar male voice. So handle it. You've dealt with difficult students before. Ms. Whitford. This one's different. His father is persistent. I think we need to build a stronger case for removal." The male voice again, then build it. Document every infraction, every disruption. Make it clear that he's not a good fit for Crestwood's culture. Ms. Whitford. What if there aren't enough infractions? A pause. Then create opportunities for them to occur. You know how to manage these situations, Elaine. The video ended. The cafeteria erupted. Parents were shouting, demanding to know who the male voice belonged to. Principal Reed looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Board Member Langston's professional composure cracked for the first time, her face showing genuine shock and anger. "That's Christopher Hale's voice," someone said. Others who knew him agreed. Daniel stood slowly. His voice cut through the chaos, calm, but carrying an edge that made everyone quiet down. You weren't just neglecting the problem. You were actively creating it. You were trying to force my son out of this school. Principal Reed finally found his voice. I didn't know about any of this. I swear, I had no idea this was happening. You had disciplinary reports crossing your desk, Daniel said. You had a child being sent to your office repeatedly. You had teachers trying to raise concerns. You knew something was wrong. You just chose not to look too closely. Reed had no response. His silence was an admission. Patricia Langston stood, her voice firm. This meeting is temporarily adjourned while the board consults in private. Everyone, please remain here. We will return shortly with next steps. As the board members filed out, the cafeteria buzzed with conversation. Daniel sat back down, pulling Noah close. His son was trembling slightly, overwhelmed by seeing all the evidence of his suffering laid out for everyone to witness. I'm proud of you, Daniel whispered, for surviving this, for being strong enough to make it through. I didn't feel strong, Noah admitted. I felt scared all the time. Being scared and doing it anyway, that's the definition of courage. Angela leaned over. Mr. Carter, whatever happens next, our family stands with yours. Olivia told me everything tonight, and I'm horrified that I didn't see the signs sooner. Other parents approached, offering similar sentiments. Some apologized for not noticing, for not questioning why their children came home talking about Noah being trouble. The atmosphere was shifting. What had been a school community willing to look the other way was becoming a group of parents demanding accountability and change. 20 minutes later, the board members returned. Patricia Langston's expression was grave. After reviewing the evidence presented today and consulting with the district superintendent, the school board has made the following decisions, effective immediately. The room went silent. Ms. Elaine Whitford is hereby suspended without pay pending a full investigation into allegations of misconduct, falsification of records, and child endangerment. If the investigation confirms what we've seen today, termination proceedings will begin, and the matter will be referred to appropriate authorities. Murmurs of approval. Principal Harrison Reed is placed on administrative leave while we investigate his role in these events and determine whether his oversight was adequate. Reed's head dropped. He'd known this was coming. Christopher Hale is removed from the school board effective immediately. We are also reviewing his son's enrollment status. More nods of agreement from the crowd. Langston continued. All disciplinary records for Noah Carter are being expunged and will be thoroughly reviewed by an independent third party. An investigation will be conducted into whether similar targeting has occurred with other students. She paused, looking directly at Daniel and Noah. On behalf of Crestwood Academy, I want to apologize to the Carter family. What happened to Noah should never happen to any child in our care. We failed him, and we take full responsibility for that failure. Daniel stood, Noah beside him. I appreciate the apology, Board Member Langston, but apologies aren't enough. My son needs to know he's safe here. Every child needs to know they're safe here. What structural changes are you planning to ensure this never happens again? Langston nodded. That's a fair question. The board will be implementing mandatory bias training for all staff, creating an independent student advocacy position, establishing a transparent reporting system for bullying and harassment, and conducting quarterly reviews of disciplinary data to identify any patterns of discrimination. We're also creating a parent oversight committee to ensure accountability. And the students who harass my son? Daniel asked. They will face appropriate consequences. Their parents will be notified, and there will be mandatory counseling and education as part of their disciplinary process. It wasn't perfect. Daniel knew that real change would take time, that systems built over years couldn't be dismantled in a day. But it was a start. It was acknowledgement. It was action. Angela stood. I want to join that parent oversight committee. My daughter showed courage today, and I want to honor that by making sure this school lives up to the values it claims to represent. Other parents echoed the sentiment, volunteering to be part of the solution. As the meeting began to wind down, students started approaching Noah. Some had apologized earlier, but others were just now finding the courage. One boy, someone Noah recognized from his math class, looked particularly ashamed. Noah, I'm sorry I never said anything. I saw what was happening, and I didn't want them to start targeting me too. That was cowardly. Noah looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Thanks for saying that. The boy offered a tentative smile. Maybe we could sit together at lunch sometime? If you want to, I mean. For the first time all day, Noah smiled. Yeah, I'd like that. More students made similar offers. Olivia stayed close, her loyalty never wavering. Slowly, the isolation that had defined Noah's experience at Crestwood was beginning to crack. As families started to leave, Daniel noticed a woman standing near the back, watching quietly. She approached, introducing herself as a reporter from the local news station. Mr. Carter, I've been following this story. Would you be willing to speak on camera about what happened today? Daniel considered it. Part of him wanted privacy, wanted to take Noah home and never think about this place again. But another part of him knew that silence had allowed this situation to fester. Speaking up might prevent it from happening to someone else. Yes, he said finally. I'll talk to you, but not today. Tomorrow. My son has been through enough for one day. The reporter nodded respectfully and handed him her card. As Daniel and Noah finally walked to their car, the sun was setting, casting the school in shades of orange and gold. Noah looked back at the building, his expression complex, mixture of pain and relief, and something that might have been hope. Dad, he said as they reached the car. Yeah, buddy. Thank you for believing me. Even when I didn't tell you everything, you knew something was wrong, and you showed up. Daniel pulled his son into a hug, his voice thick with emotion. I'll always show up for you. Always. That's a promise. They got in the car, but before Daniel started the engine, Noah pulled something from his backpack. A folded piece of paper, crumpled and worn as if it had been read many times. What's that? Daniel asked. Noah handed it to him. I found it in my locker this morning. Before everything happened, Daniel unfolded the paper. The handwriting was shaky, anonymous. Stay strong. You're not alone. Some of us see what's happening, and we're trying to find the courage to speak up. Don't give up. Daniel looked at his son, seeing the strength it must have taken to walk into that school day after day, carrying this small piece of hope while facing relentless cruelty. You saved yourself today, too, Daniel said softly. By not giving up, by holding on. I'm so proud of you. As they drove away from Crestwood Academy, neither of them knew that the day's revelations were just the beginning. There were deeper secrets still buried, patterns that extended beyond Noah, and a system of corruption that was about to be exposed in ways that would shock everyone. But for now, in this moment, father and son drove home together, the worst of the day behind them, and the promise of justice finally within reach. The morning after the cafeteria confrontation, Daniel woke early, his mind refusing to rest despite the exhaustion weighing on him. Noah was still asleep, and Daniel was grateful for that small mercy. His son needed the peace that sleep provided, a temporary escape from the trauma of the previous day. Daniel sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. His inbox was flooded with emails. Parents from the school expressing support, reporters requesting interviews, and one message that caught his attention immediately. It was from the district superintendent's office, marked urgent, requesting his presence at the school at 9 o'clock sharp. He checked the time. 7:30. He had enough time to let Noah sleep a bit longer before waking him. By 8:45, they were pulling into the Crestwood Academy parking lot. The atmosphere was drastically different from the day before. News vans lined the street outside the gates, reporters with cameras positioned strategically to catch anyone entering or leaving. Daniel drove past them without stopping, though he noticed several cameras swiveling to follow his car. Inside, the school felt eerily quiet. Classes were in session, but there was a tension in the air that even the closed classroom doors couldn't contain. Daniel walked with Noah toward the main office, where they'd been instructed to meet the investigators. Two people waited for them in the conference room. A woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor introduced herself as Margaret Hayes, lead investigator for the district. Beside her sat a younger man, probably in his 30s, who identified himself as James Caldwell, her assistant. Mr. Carter, Noah, thank you for coming in, Margaret said, gesturing to chairs across from them. I know yesterday was difficult, and I appreciate your willingness to cooperate with our investigation. Daniel nodded, keeping his arm around Noah's shoulders. We want the truth to come out, whatever that takes. Margaret opened a thick folder filled with documents and printed screenshots. We spent the last 18 hours reviewing everything. The videos students provided, the security footage, staff communications, and disciplinary records. What we found is deeply troubling. She pulled out several papers, spreading them on the table. These are Noah's disciplinary reports from the past 4 months. According to these documents, Noah has been written up 14 times for various infractions ranging from disrupting class to aggressive behavior toward other students. Noah tensed beside Daniel. But I didn't do those things. Most of them didn't even happen. We know, James said gently. When we cross-referenced these reports with the timestamps on security footage and attendance records, we found significant discrepancies. Several incidents allegedly occurred on days when Noah wasn't even at school. Others show him in completely different locations than where the incidents supposedly took place. Daniel felt his jaw tighten. Someone fabricated evidence against my son. Margaret nodded grimly. It appears that way. We'll need to interview several people to confirm exactly who was involved and to what extent. We'd like to start with Noah, if that's all right with you both. Daniel looked at his son. You okay with that, buddy? I'll be right outside the whole time. Noah took a deep breath and nodded. I want to tell them everything. Daniel squeezed his shoulder and stepped out into the hallway, leaving the door slightly ajar. He could hear the murmur of voices, Margaret's patient questions, and Noah's quiet but steady responses. Other parents were arriving now, their children being called in for interviews one by one. Olivia arrived with her mother, Angela. The girl looked nervous but determined. When she saw Daniel, she managed a small wave. How's Noah doing? Angela asked. He's strong, Daniel said. Stronger than he should have to be. 20 minutes later, Margaret called Daniel back in. Noah looked exhausted but relieved, as if a weight had been lifted by finally telling someone official everything that had happened. Noah's been very helpful, Margaret said. His account aligns with what we've seen in the videos and contradicts the official reports significantly. We'll be speaking with other students throughout the day to build a complete picture. What about Ms. Whitford? Daniel asked. And Principal Reed? They're scheduled for interviews this afternoon, James replied, along with several teachers and Christopher Hale. As Daniel and Noah left the conference room, they passed Olivia heading in. She gave Noah a quick, encouraging smile that made his face brighten just a little. It was a small moment, but Daniel recognized its importance. Noah was starting to see that he had allies, that he wasn't alone. They waited in the hallway as student after student went in for interviews. The pattern became clear quickly. Most students corroborated Noah's version of events. They described seeing him being bullied, seeing teachers ignore it, seeing Ms. Whitford consistently blame Noah for conflicts he didn't start. Then a young teacher, the same woman who had whispered to Daniel about the altered files, was called in. Her name was Sarah Mitchell, and she looked terrified. Daniel could hear fragments of the conversation through the partially open door. I try to raise concerns, Sarah said, her voice shaking. Back in October, I noticed that Noah was being isolated. I saw students deliberately excluding him, and when I asked about it, one of the kids said Ms. Whitford told them Noah was trouble and they should keep their distance. Margaret's voice. What did you do with that information? I went to Principal Reed. I told him I was worried about a pattern of behavior toward Noah, that it seemed coordinated. He told me Ms. Whitford had everything under control, that she'd been handling Noah's discipline issues, and I shouldn't interfere. Did you follow up? A long pause. No, I should have, but I didn't. Ms. Whitford she was intimidating. She had a lot of power in this school. I was afraid if I pushed too hard, it would affect my career. The honesty in her admission was painful to hear. Daniel understood fear and self-preservation, but it still stung to know that adults who could have helped his son chose silence instead. The interview that changed everything came just before lunch. Christopher Hale's son, a boy named Brandon, was brought in by his mother, not his father. The woman looked mortified and angry in equal measure. Daniel watched as she practically dragged her son into the conference room. her expression making it clear that there would be consequences at home regardless of what the school decided. The interview lasted over an hour. When they emerged, Brandon's mother's face was streaked with tears, and the boy looked smaller somehow, his earlier arrogance completely gone. Margaret stepped out shortly after. "Mr. Carter, could you come back in for a moment?" Daniel followed her inside. Margaret pulled out her laptop and turned it toward him. During Brandon Hale's interview, he admitted to several things. But the most significant was this. He showed us a group chat between him and several other students. The screen displayed a messaging app. Daniel leaned forward, reading through the conversation. His blood ran cold. The messages went back months. Instructions on how to provoke Noah. Encouragement to exclude him from group activities. Jokes about his race, his family, his clothes. And woven throughout it all were messages from an adult phone number that Brandon admitted belonged to his father, Christopher Hale. One message from Hale's number read, "Keep it up. If the Carter kid leaves, there's a bonus in it for you." Another, "Make sure witnesses see him react, not what you do to make him react." Daniel's hands clenched into fists. "He paid his son to torment mine." "It appears that way," Margaret said quietly. "We're still investigating the full extent of Christopher Hale's involvement, but what we have here is potentially criminal. Conspiracy to harass a minor, contributing to the delinquency of a minor, possibly more." James added, "We've also discovered something else troubling. While reviewing Ms. Whitford's computer, we found a folder marked restricted access. It contained draft disciplinary reports, written before any incidents allegedly occurred." He pulled up several documents on his laptop. Each one was dated and time-stamped. These reports were created sometimes days or even weeks before the incidents they describe. She was planning Noah's infractions in advance, creating a paper trail designed to make him look like a problem student. Daniel felt sick. Why? Why target my son specifically? Margaret and James exchanged glances. Margaret spoke carefully. "We found email correspondence between Ms. Whitford and Christopher Hale going back to September, right after school started. In one email, Hale expresses concern about, quote, certain families lowering the school standards. Ms. Whitford responds that she'll make sure the problem is handled discreetly. They wanted Noah gone because of the color of his skin," Daniel said, his voice hollow. "They targeted an 11-year-old child because they didn't think he belonged at their precious school." Neither investigator denied it. The evidence was too clear, too damning. Margaret closed her laptop. "Mr. Carter, I want you to know that what happened to Noah is unacceptable, and everyone involved will face consequences. But I need to ask you something. Would you be willing to let us expand this investigation? Some of the emails we found suggest this may not be the first time something like this has happened." Daniel looked at her sharply. "You think there are other victims?" "We think it's possible. If you're willing to let us continue, we'd like to review disciplinary records for other students, particularly minority students, going back several years." Daniel didn't hesitate. "Do it. If this happened to other kids, their families deserve to know." The morning stretched into afternoon. More interviews, more revelations. A pattern emerged that was as clear as it was horrifying. Ms. Whitford had been systematically targeting students she deemed unfit for Crestwood, with Christopher Hale's encouragement and financial support. She'd create false reports, manipulate situations, and push students toward breaking points that would justify their removal. When Ms. Whitford finally arrived for her interview, she came with a lawyer. The session lasted 3 hours, and when she emerged, her face was ashen. Whatever confidence she'd once possessed had evaporated. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and her lawyer knew it. Principal Reed's interview was equally devastating. He admitted to ignoring warning signs, dismissing teacher concerns, and prioritizing donor relationships over student welfare. His negligence had created an environment where Whitford's actions could go unchecked. By the time the school day ended, the investigators had conducted over 30 interviews. The picture they'd assembled was one of institutional failure, prejudice, and deliberate cruelty toward vulnerable students. Margaret found Daniel in the hallway where he'd been waiting with Noah. "We have enough to move forward with formal recommendations. Ms. Whitford will be terminated and will face potential criminal charges. Principal Reed's employment is being reviewed. Christopher Hale is facing possible criminal investigation for his role in organizing the harassment. And Noah, Daniel asked, what happens to him now? That's up to you, Margaret said gently. The school is prepared to make whatever accommodations you need. If you want to transfer Noah elsewhere, they'll facilitate that. If you want him to stay, they'll ensure he has support and protection. It's your choice. Daniel looked at his son, who'd been quietly listening. What do you want, Noah? Noah thought for a long moment. I want to stay. I don't want them to win. I want to prove I belong here. Pride swelled in Daniel's chest. After everything, his son was still fighting, still refusing to be broken. News of the investigation's findings spread through Crestwood Academy like wildfire. By the next morning, when Daniel dropped Noah off for school, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Students whispered in clusters, parents gathered in tight groups near the entrance, and teachers moved through the halls with expressions that ranged from shame to anger to fear about their own jobs. The school board had called an emergency meeting for that evening, open to all families. The auditorium was expected to be packed, and tensions were running high. Rumors swirled about what the investigators had found, though the official report hadn't been released publicly yet. Daniel had decided to attend the meeting, but first, he wanted to make sure Noah was settling back into school okay. Despite his son's brave declaration about staying, Daniel worried about how other students would treat him now that everything had come to light. His concerns proved partially founded. Some students avoided Noah entirely, either out of guilt or discomfort with the situation. Others, however, surprised him. Several kids approached Noah during the morning break, apologizing for their silence or their participation in his isolation. A boy from Noah's science class invited him to sit at his lunch table. Two girls from art class asked if he wanted to work on a project together. Olivia, as always, stayed close, her quiet presence a constant source of support. But not everyone was ready to accept the new reality. A small group of students, children of wealthy donor families, made their displeasure known. They whispered loudly enough for Noah to hear about how the investigation was ruining the school's reputation, about how everyone was overreacting, about how their parents were considering pulling their donations. One boy, a friend of Brandon Hale's, was particularly vocal. During lunch, he walked past Noah's table and muttered loud enough for several people to hear, "Hope you're happy. You destroyed this whole school." Before Noah could respond, 3 students from nearby tables stood up simultaneously. "He didn't destroy anything," one of them said firmly. "The people who were tormenting him did that." "Yeah," another added. "Maybe if you spent less time being a jerk, the school wouldn't need to investigate anything." The boy flushed red and walked away, but the moment represented something important. The tide was turning. Students were choosing sides, and increasingly, they were choosing to stand against the bullying and discrimination that had been allowed to flourish. That evening, the auditorium filled to capacity an hour before the meeting was scheduled to start. Daniel arrived with Noah, and they found seats near the middle. Angela and Olivia joined them, along with several other families who'd become allies over the past 2 days. The room buzzed with anxious energy. Parents demanded answers. Some wanted justice. Others wanted to defend the school's reputation. A few seemed primarily concerned about property values and how scandal might affect their investments in the neighborhood. When board member Patricia Langston stepped to the podium, flanked by the other board members and the district superintendent, the room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming," Langston began. "I know emotions are running high, and you all deserve transparency about what our investigation has uncovered." She proceeded to lay out the findings in clear, unflinching terms. The falsified disciplinary records, the coordinated harassment campaign, the financial incentives Christopher Hale had offered his son, the years of complaints that had been dismissed or buried, the pattern of targeting minority students that extended beyond Noah. With each revelation, the room's reaction intensified. Gasps of disbelief, angry shouts. Some parents looked genuinely shocked, as if they couldn't fathom how such things could happen at a school they trusted. Others looked guilty, perhaps recognizing their own complicity in maintaining a system that allowed discrimination to thrive. When Langston finished, she opened the floor for questions. Hands shot up immediately. A father near the front stood. Why wasn't Christopher Hale stopped sooner? People knew he had too much influence over school decisions. Langston's expression tightened. That's a fair question, and the honest answer is that we failed in our oversight. Mr. Hale's donations created a dynamic where his opinions carried disproportionate weight. That was wrong, and we take responsibility for allowing it to happen. Another parent, a woman Daniel recognized from school fundraisers, stood up. What about the other students? You said this wasn't just about Noah Carter. How many other children were targeted? The superintendent, a stern woman named Dr. Helen Foster, stepped forward. Our preliminary review has identified at least 6 other students over the past 3 years who may have been subjected to similar treatment. We're reaching out to their families to inform them and offer support. The room erupted. Parents turned to each other, some recognizing that their own children might have been among the victims. The scope of the scandal was widening, and the implications were staggering. A man in an expensive suit stood, his face red with anger. This is ridiculous. You're destroying this school's reputation over a few misunderstandings and the complaints of families who clearly don't understand Crestwood's culture. Several people gasped at his audacity. Daniel felt his jaw clench, but before he could respond, another parent beat him to it. Crestwood's culture? A woman shouted back. If the culture includes racism and targeting children, then it deserves to be destroyed. Applause erupted from a significant portion of the audience. The man in the suit looked around, seemingly surprised that his view wasn't more widely shared, and sat back down with a scowl. Then Christopher Hale himself stood up from where he'd been sitting in the back. The room went quiet, everyone turning to look at him. He looked haggard, his usual polish dimmed by stress and probably lack of sleep. I want to address the allegations against me, Hale said, his voice carrying across the auditorium. The emails and messages that have been referenced are being taken completely out of context. I never instructed my son to harm anyone. I was merely trying to maintain standards of excellence at this institution. By paying your son to torment an 11-year-old? Someone shouted from the crowd. By encouraging him to stand up for the values this school was founded on? Hale shot back, his composure cracking. Crestwood Academy has always been a place for families of a certain caliber. When that standard is diluted, everyone suffers. The room erupted into chaos. Multiple parents stood, shouting over each other. Some defended Hale's right to his opinion, but far more condemned his barely disguised racism and his actions against Noah. Daniel remained seated, his arm around Noah, watching as the school community tore itself apart over values and beliefs that had apparently been simmering beneath the surface for years. Angela stood, her voice cutting through the noise. Mr. Hale, my daughter is in Noah's class. She's witnessed firsthand the torment he endured. Your son and his friends didn't maintain excellence. They engaged in cruel, coordinated harassment of a child whose only crime was existing in a space you thought should be exclusive. That's not about standards. That's about bigotry. A round of applause supported her words. Hale's face went from red to purple, his hands clenching at his sides. Before he could respond, Dr. Foster intervened. Mr. Hale, you are no longer a member of this board, and given the ongoing investigation, I must ask you to leave this meeting. You can't do this, Hale sputtered. My family has supported this school for generations. We've donated hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we're grateful for those past contributions, Langston said firmly. But money does not buy the right to harm children. Security will escort you out if necessary. For a moment, it seemed like Hale might refuse. He looked around the room, perhaps seeking support, but found mostly hostile stares and crossed arms. Finally, with a sound of disgust, he turned and stormed toward the exit. Parents moved aside to let him pass, some glaring, others looking away uncomfortably. As the door slammed behind him, a collective exhale seemed to move through the room. Dr. Foster continued. The district has made several decisions regarding Crestwood Academy's leadership and policies. Effective immediately, Ms. Whitford's employment is terminated. She will also face criminal charges for falsifying official documents and child endangerment. Nods of approval throughout the audience. Principal Reed has resigned, effective end of this week. The district will appoint an interim principal while we search for permanent leadership. More agreement, though some parents looked sad. Reed had been at Crestwood for over a decade, but his negligence had contributed to the crisis. Additionally, Dr. Foster went on, we're implementing comprehensive reforms. Mandatory implicit bias training for all staff. An independent student advocate position with direct reporting to the district. A transparent system for reporting discrimination and harassment. Quarterly reviews of all disciplinary data by an outside consultant to identify potential patterns of bias. And a parent oversight committee with real authority to review school policies and practices. The changes were substantial, more than Daniel had dared to hope for. Around the room, parents were nodding, some taking notes, others whispering to neighbors about volunteering for the oversight committee. But not everyone was satisfied. A group of parents near the side of the auditorium stood almost in unison. One of them, a woman dripping with jewelry and obvious wealth, spoke loudly. This is outrageous. You're destroying the school's reputation and culture based on the complaints of a handful of families. My husband and I have been discussing this with other families, and we're strongly considering withdrawing our children and our financial support. Crestwood won't survive without us. She looked around, clearly expecting support. A few parents stood with her, maybe a dozen in total out of the hundreds present. Dr. Foster's expression didn't change. That is, of course, you're right. But I want to be very clear about something. Crestwood Academy's mission is to educate children, all children, in an environment of respect and excellence. If that mission is incompatible with your values, then perhaps this isn't the right school for your family. The woman's face flushed with anger. She gathered her purse and coat and stalked toward the exit, her small group following. As they left, someone started clapping. Then another person. Within seconds, the majority of the auditorium was applauding their departure. The message was clear. The school community was choosing change over maintaining a corrupt status quo. When the applause died down, a parent Daniel didn't recognize stood up. I want to hear from Mr. Carter and his son. They're at the center of this, and I think we need to hear their perspective. Heads turned toward Daniel and Noah. Daniel felt his son tense beside him. This wasn't something they planned for, but as he looked around the room, he saw faces filled with genuine curiosity and concern, not hostility. Would you be willing to speak? Daniel asked Noah quietly. Noah swallowed hard, then nodded. Together, they stood and made their way to the front of the auditorium. Daniel helped Noah step up to a small platform so he could reach the microphone. For a moment, Noah just stood there, looking out at the sea of faces. Then he took a deep breath and spoke. I didn't want any of this, he said, his voice small but steady. I just wanted to go to school and learn and have friends. When kids started being mean to me, I tried to ignore it. I thought if I didn't cause trouble, it would stop. But it didn't stop. It got worse. And the adults I was supposed to trust either didn't believe me or didn't care. His voice cracked slightly, but he pushed through. I'm not trying to ruin anyone's school. I just wanted to be treated like I matter. Like I belong. Is that really too much to ask? The auditorium was completely silent. Some parents were crying. Others looked ashamed. The weight of Noah's simple, honest words settled over everyone. Daniel stepped forward, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. My son is the bravest person I know. He survived months of harassment and discrimination, and he's still here, still fighting, still believing that this school can be better. He's giving Crestwood a second chance. The question is whether the community will rise to meet his faith in them. The applause that followed was thunderous. People stood, some wiping away tears, others looking determined. Noah pressed close to his father's side, overwhelmed by the response, but visibly relieved. As they returned to their seats, students approached Noah, offering words of support and apology. Teachers came over to shake Daniel's hand and promised to do better. The atmosphere had fundamentally shifted. The meeting continued for another hour, parents volunteering for committees, teachers offering ideas for reform, and students sharing their own experiences of witnessing or experiencing discrimination. It was painful, honest, and necessary. As the meeting finally adjourned, Daniel and Noah walked toward the exit. Patricia Langston intercepted them, her expression serious. "Mr. Carter, there's something else you should know. During our investigation, we found references to a storage room, room 317, where old disciplinary records are kept. The investigator mentioned you might want to see what's there. It's not pretty, but it's important." Daniel looked down at Noah, who'd heard everything and nodded despite his exhaustion. "Tomorrow," Daniel said. "We'll look tomorrow. Tonight, we both need rest." But as they drove home through the dark streets, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about room 317 and what secrets it might hold. The investigation had uncovered so much already, but something told him they were only seeing the tip of something much deeper and darker. Tomorrow would bring new revelations. But tonight, Daniel let his son rest, knowing that whatever they faced next, they would face it together. The following morning, Daniel and Noah returned to Crestwood Academy with a purpose. The building felt different now, lighter somehow, as if a dark cloud had been partially lifted. Students greeted Noah in the hallways, and while some still kept their distance, the outright hostility had vanished. Margaret Hayes met them at the main entrance, her expression somber. "Thank you for coming back. Room 317 is on the 3rd floor in the administrative wing. It's not a space most people know about. Records are supposed to be digitized and stored properly, but what we found suggests someone was deliberately keeping paper trails hidden." They climbed the stairs in silence, Daniel's hand resting protectively on Noah's shoulder. The 3rd floor was quieter than the rest of the building, home mostly to offices and storage spaces that students rarely accessed. Room 317 was at the end of a long corridor, its door unmarked except for the faded number plate. Margaret unlocked it, and the smell of dust and old paper wafted out. The room was small and windowless, lined with metal shelving units packed with cardboard boxes and manila folders. "We've already begun cataloging what's here," Margaret said, pulling on latex gloves and handing pairs to Daniel and Noah. "But I wanted you to see this firsthand, to understand the scope." She led them to a shelf near the back and pulled down a box marked with years, 2019 to 2020. Inside were folders, each labeled with a student's name. Daniel recognized none of them, which made sense since Noah had only started at Crestwood this year. Margaret opened the first folder. Inside were disciplinary reports, incident forms, and handwritten notes. The student's name was Marcus Thompson. Daniel scanned the documents, his stomach sinking with each page. The pattern was identical to Noah's experience. Minor infractions escalated into major incidents. Reports of aggressive behavior from a child whose earlier records showed nothing but academic achievement and positive teacher comments. Surveillance of his lunch periods. Documentation of isolation. "What happened to this student?" Daniel asked quietly. "He transferred to public school halfway through the year," Margaret said. His mother told the administration he wasn't adjusting well to Crestwood's environment. According to her exit interview, she felt the school wasn't a good fit for their family. Daniel's jaw clenched. She was pushed out, just like they tried to do to Noah. Margaret nodded and pulled out another folder. Then another. Each told the same story with minor variations. A girl named Jasmine Reeves who'd been accused of theft despite security footage showing she'd been in class when the incident occurred. A boy named David Chun who'd been labeled as having behavioral problems after repeatedly being provoked by other students. A girl named Aisha Williams whose artistic talent had been criticized as disruptive and attention-seeking. Every single one of them was a minority student. Every single one had been targeted, documented, and ultimately pushed out of Crestwood Academy. Noah stood beside his father, looking through the folders with growing horror. This happened to all of them for years. "At least 6 students we've identified so far," Margaret confirmed. "And these are just the ones where Whitford kept detailed records. There may be others whose files were destroyed or who left before a pattern could be established." Daniel felt a mixture of fury and heartbreak. These were children, families who believed in this school, who'd invested hope and money and trust, only to be systematically betrayed. Their families need to know. They deserve to understand what really happened. "We're in the process of contacting them," Margaret assured him. "It's not easy. Some have moved away. Others may not want to revisit painful memories. But they all deserve the truth." Daniel carefully set down the folder he'd been holding. What happens now? Whitford's been fired. Hale's off the board, but that doesn't undo the damage. These kids lost years of their education, their confidence, their sense of safety. You're right, Margaret said, which is why the district is prepared to offer comprehensive support. Counseling services for affected students and their families. Academic records will be reviewed and corrected where falsification occurred. We're also establishing a reconciliation program where former students can share their experiences if they choose. It was something, but Daniel knew it wasn't enough. Nothing could give back what these children had lost. They spent another hour in room 317 documenting what they found. Each folder was a story of injustice, a child targeted and failed by a system that should have protected them. By the time they finished, Daniel felt emotionally drained, and Noah looked pale and shaken. As they prepared to leave, Margaret pulled Daniel aside. There's going to be a press conference this afternoon. The district wants to announce the findings publicly and outline the steps being taken. They'd like you to speak if you're willing. Daniel glanced at Noah, who'd wandered over to look at a bulletin board covered in old school announcements. I'll speak, but I want to be clear that this isn't just about Noah. This is about every child who was targeted, every family that was pushed out. They deserve to have their stories acknowledged. Agreed, Margaret said. And Mr. Carter, I want you to know that what you did, standing up for your son the way you did, that's what broke this open. Without your courage, these files might have stayed hidden for years more. Daniel shook his head. It wasn't courage. It was just being a parent. Any father would have done the same. But many didn't, Margaret said softly. Some saw the warning signs and convinced themselves they were imagining things. Some were told their children were the problem and believed it. You trusted your instincts and your son. That matters. The press conference was held in the school library, which had been converted into a makeshift media center. Cameras lined the back wall, reporters filled the seats, and the district's communications team had set up a podium with microphones. Dr. Foster spoke first, laying out the investigation's findings in clear, official language. She didn't minimize the severity of what had occurred or try to protect the school's image. Instead, she acknowledged complete institutional failure and outlined the comprehensive reforms being implemented. When it was Daniel's turn to speak, he stepped to the podium with Noah beside him. He'd prepared notes, but found himself setting them aside, speaking instead from the heart. My son is 11 years old, Daniel began, his voice steady but emotional. He loves art, basketball, and video games. He makes me laugh every day, even when he doesn't mean to. He's smart, kind, and more resilient than any child should have to be. When I enrolled him at Crestwood Academy, I believed I was giving him opportunities. Instead, I nearly lost him to a system designed to break him. He paused, gathering himself. But Noah isn't the only victim. We discovered files today, hidden away in a storage room, documenting years of abuse against students whose only crime was being different from what certain people thought a Crestwood student should be. Those children and their families deserve acknowledgement. They deserve apologies. They deserve justice. Daniel looked directly into the cameras. To the families of Marcus Thompson, Jasmine Reeves, David Chun, Aisha Williams, and others we're still identifying, I want you to know that what happened to your children wasn't their fault. They weren't behavioral problems. They weren't bad fits. They were targeted by adults who should have protected them. You were right to trust your instincts. I'm sorry it took this long for the truth to come out. His voice grew stronger. My son didn't need special treatment. None of these children did. They just needed fairness. They needed adults to see them as individuals, not as problems to be managed or eliminated. Every child deserves to walk into school without fear. That's not a privilege. That's a basic right. Daniel stepped back, placing his hand on Noah's shoulder. Noah looked up at the cameras, his young face serious, and spoke without prompting. I forgive the kids who were mean to me, Noah said quietly. I think some of them were just copying what they heard from adults. But I'll never forget how it felt to be alone every day, to feel like nobody cared. I hope Crestwood becomes the kind of school where no one has to feel that way again. The room was silent except for the click of camera shutters. Several reporters wiped their eyes. Dr. Foster's expression was one of profound sadness and determination. Questions followed, But Daniel kept his answers brief. This wasn't about him, or even just about Noah anymore. This was about systemic change, about accountability, about ensuring that what had happened at Crestwood Academy never happened again. As the press conference ended, reporters approached asking for individual interviews, but Daniel politely declined. He and Noah had said what needed to be said. Now it was time to focus on healing. Over the following weeks, consequences began to solidify. Ms. Whitford was formally charged with falsifying official documents, conspiracy to commit harassment, and child endangerment. Her teaching credentials were permanently revoked. Christopher Hale faced criminal charges as well, and several of his business partnerships quietly dissolved as news of his actions spread. Principal Reed's resignation became permanent. The interim principal, a woman named Dr. Lisa Morgan with a background in restorative justice and inclusive education, brought immediate changes to the school's culture. Students who'd participated in Noah's harassment attended mandatory counseling and education programs. Some showed genuine remorse and made efforts to apologize meaningfully. Others remained resentful but were closely monitored. And slowly, carefully, Noah began to heal. He made friends, real friends who valued him for who he was. His artwork, which had been suppressed and criticized under Whitford's reign, was displayed prominently in the school's main hallway. Teachers who'd been afraid to speak up before became some of his strongest advocates. But Daniel knew that justice, real justice, was more complicated than punishment and policy changes. It was about restoration, about ensuring that the harm done could be acknowledged and, as much as possible, repaired. 3 months after the cafeteria confrontation, Daniel received an email that made him pause. It was from an address he didn't recognize, with a subject line that read simply, "Thank you." He opened it carefully, conscious of the various threats and angry messages he'd received from people who believed he'd overreacted or ruined Crestwood's reputation. But this message was different. "Mr. Carter, you don't know me, but my daughter was Jasmine Reeves. We left Crestwood 3 years ago after she was accused of theft and constant behavioral problems. It destroyed her confidence and made her believe she was a bad kid. When I saw the news about your son and the investigation, everything made sense. My daughter wasn't the problem. The school was. Thank you for fighting when we couldn't. Thank you for giving us answers we thought we'd never get. Because of you, my daughter finally understands she wasn't to blame. You saved her even though you never met her." Daniel read the message 3 times, tears blurring his vision. He replied immediately, offering to connect, to share experiences, to build community among the families who'd been affected. Over the next weeks, more families reached out. Marcus Thompson's mother, David Chin's parents, others whose children had been targeted but who'd been too afraid or too exhausted to fight back. They formed a support network, a group of parents and former students who met monthly to share stories, process trauma, and advocate for continued reform. The district's investigation expanded beyond Crestwood, examining whether similar patterns existed at other schools. What they found was troubling but important. Crestwood wasn't unique. Implicit bias, preferential treatment for wealthy donors, and systemic discrimination existed throughout the district, just manifested differently in different places. The revelations sparked district-wide reforms. New training programs, independent oversight committees, transparent reporting systems, anonymous hotlines for students and staff to report concerns without fear of retaliation. It was overwhelming, ambitious, and necessary. Noah, meanwhile, was thriving in ways Daniel had hardly dared to hope for. His grades improved dramatically once he wasn't spending all his energy just surviving each day. His artwork evolved, incorporating themes of resilience and justice that showed emotional maturity beyond his years. He joined a basketball team and made the art club's leadership committee. Most importantly, he was happy. He laughed easily, made plans with friends, and talked excitedly about projects and ideas. The shadow that had hung over him for months had finally lifted. One afternoon in late spring, Daniel was called to the school for what he initially feared was another problem. Instead, Dr. Morgan greeted him with a smile and led him to the auditorium where an assembly was underway. "We wanted you to see this," she said quietly. On stage, students were presenting awards for courage and character. Noah sat in the audience with his classmates, unaware that his father was watching from the back. Olivia was called to the stage first, recognized for her bravery in speaking up when others stayed silent. She accepted her certificate with a shy smile, looking both proud and embarrassed by the attention. Then Noah's name was called. He looked surprised, walking to the stage with uncertain steps. Dr. Morgan met him there, addressing the assembled students and staff. "Noah Carter showed us all what it means to persevere with grace," she said. "He faced challenges that would have broken many adults, yet he continued to show up, to try, to hope for better. He gave this school a second chance when he had every reason to walk away. He believed we could be better, and he was right." This award recognizes not just his courage, but his faith in us to rise to the occasion. The applause was thunderous. Students stood, some wiping their eyes. Teachers joined in, and Noah, his face lit with a smile that reached his eyes, accepted the recognition with quiet dignity. Daniel felt his throat tighten with emotion. This was the moment he'd been fighting for. Not the punishment of wrongdoers or the reform of systems, though those mattered. This moment, seeing his son honored and celebrated, and finally treated with the respect he'd always deserved. After the assembly, as Daniel waited for Noah outside, several parents approached him. Some thanked him for what he'd done. Others apologized for their earlier skepticism or silence. He accepted their words with grace, knowing that healing was a process for everyone, not just the direct victims. Noah emerged from the building surrounded by friends, laughing at something Olivia had said. When he saw his father, his face lit up even more. "Dad, did you see? They gave me an award." "I saw," Daniel said, pulling his son into a hug. "I'm so proud of you, buddy. So incredibly proud." As they walked to the car, Noah chattering excitedly about the assembly and his plans to hang the certificate in his room, Daniel reflected on how far they'd come. The journey had been painful, exposing wounds that went deeper than anyone had initially realized. But from that pain had come change, real change that would protect future students from experiencing what Noah had endured. That evening, Daniel sat at his desk, reviewing emails from the family support group they'd formed. Plans were underway for a memorial scholarship in honor of all the students who'd been pushed out of schools due to discrimination. It would support minority students pursuing education in environments that valued their potential rather than viewing them as problems. As he typed responses and coordinated plans, Noah appeared in the doorway of his office. "Hey, Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course, buddy. What's on your mind?" Noah walked in, holding something behind his back. "I found this in my locker today. I don't know who left it, but I wanted to show you." He handed Daniel a small envelope, the kind used for greeting cards. Inside was a simple piece of notebook paper with careful handwriting. "You saved all of us. Not just the kids who were targeted, but the ones who participated too. You showed us that staying silent makes us part of the problem. You taught us to be brave. Thank you for not giving up. A grateful student." Daniel read the note twice, his chest tight with emotion. He looked up at Noah, seeing the maturity and strength that had grown from adversity. "Do you know who wrote this?" Noah shook his head. "Could be anyone. Lots of kids have been different since everything happened. They think more now, question things more. Some of them have even apologized for stuff they did in other situations, not just to me, but to other students. That's what real change looks like," Daniel said softly. "It's not just policies and punishments. It's people choosing to be better than they were." Noah nodded thoughtfully. "Do you think Mom will be proud of how we handled everything?" The question caught Daniel off guard, but he recovered quickly, memories of Lena flooding back. Her wisdom, her strength, her unwavering belief that doing the right thing mattered, even when it was hard. "Your mom would be incredibly proud," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "She always said you were going to change the world. I think she'd say you already started." Noah smiled, that genuine, unguarded smile that had become more frequent in recent weeks. "I am glad we stayed. I am glad we fought." "Me too, buddy. Me too." As Noah headed to bed, Daniel sat alone in his office, that anonymous note still in his hands. He thought about all the families they'd connected with, all the students who'd been given their voices back, all the changes that had rippled outward from one father refusing to accept injustice against his son. The work wasn't finished. Systemic change took years, maybe generations. There would be setbacks and resistance. Some people would always prioritize comfort and tradition over justice and inclusion. But the foundation had been laid. The truth had been exposed. And a community had been forced to confront its failures and commit to doing better. Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from Angela. The Parent Oversight Committee was meeting next week to review proposed changes to the school's disciplinary procedures. He confirmed his attendance, knowing that vigilance was the price of maintaining the progress they'd made. Another text came through, this one from Marcus Thompson's mother. Her son had been accepted to a prestigious art program, his confidence finally restored after years of believing he wasn't good enough. She wanted to thank Daniel again for giving them the closure and validation they'd needed. He replied with congratulations and encouragement, adding Marcus to the growing list of success stories that reminded him why the fight had been worth it. Late that night, Daniel checked on Noah one last time before heading to bed himself. His son was asleep, the certificate from the assembly propped on his nightstand where he could see it first thing in the morning. His face was peaceful, free from the fear and tension that had defined it for too long. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching his son sleep, and felt a profound sense of gratitude mixed with lingering anger at what Noah had endured. But more than anything, he felt hope. Hope that the changes they'd fought for would last. Hope that future students would benefit from the courage shown by Noah and the other targets who'd refused to be silenced. Hope that Crestwood Academy would truly become the inclusive, supportive environment it claimed to be. As he turned to leave, Daniel whispered into the darkness, "We did it, Lena. We protected him. And in doing so, we protected others too. Just like you always said we should." Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, the spring air carrying the promise of new beginnings. Inside, a father and son slept peacefully, knowing they'd faced down injustice together and emerged stronger. The story of what happened at Crestwood Academy would be told for years to come. Some would remember it as a scandal, others as a cautionary tale. But for Daniel and Noah Carter, it would always be remembered as the moment they refused to let hate and discrimination win. The moment they stood up and said enough. And in the end, that made all the difference. When you see a child being isolated or targeted, do you speak up, or do you tell yourself it's not your place to interfere? Hit that like button if this story moved you, and subscribe for more powerful stories about courage, justice, and standing up for what's right.